Hello, everybody, and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host, Eric, and this is, of course, the show where we are reviewing every movie ever made. And today we're going to start by looking at The Rescuers. This is a classic. Well, I guess classic is going to, as we're going to find out, is a little bit debatable, but this is the animated Disney feature about a couple of mice trying to save a runaway girl from an evil lady who wants a diamond. Here's the thing. I love The Rescuers. This is one of, if not my favorite Disney animated feature. It, for whatever reason, just speaks to me. I love the main characters, Bernard and Bianca. They're two mice, as played by Bob Newhart, and the always vivacious and funny Ava Gabor, the good Gabor sister. And this is what the deal is that Ava is an agent for an organization called the Rescue Aid Society, and this is what gets me right here. This is a group of mice who work in the basement of the United Nations, and their whole job is helping people who need help. Bernard is their janitor, but he steps up and agrees to go with Bianca to try and save this little girl who has written a message in a bottle that she needs help. One of the things that makes Disney Disney is their handle on emotion, and at its best, The Rescuers is never short of emotion. Particularly, there's a scene early on in the film where Bernard and Bianca go to an orphanage that the girl they're trying to rescue, that she had been living in before she was adopted, and they meet this old cat who was her friend, and the cat tells them all about her and how she's missing, and that scene chokes me up every time. As for the rest of the movie, well, it had been a little while since I've seen it, and watching it this time, it occurred to me that, you know what, The Rescuers maybe isn't that good a movie. It's from sort of a rough period in the history of Disney animation, and you can feel it here at times. The movie is maybe a little bit too long. The music that's in it is a little too saccharine. The animation itself is a little bit on the cheaper side to what we are used to from Disney. But the characters and the emotion do come through in this. And I do think it's still a worthwhile movie that I am going to give a slightly better review for than I should, just because I love it so much. I also recently learned that the villainess in this movie, Madame Medusa, was in the early stages of planning for this movie going to be Cruella de Vil. But for whatever reason, they decided they didn't end up wanting to use Cruella again, and they came up with Madame Medusa, who is honestly just Cruella. It would be interesting to see what this movie would be like with Cruella de Vil in it. It also would be interesting to see this movie done more in the style of 101 Dalmatians, which has that very evocative animation style, as opposed to this one, which just seems a little, I suppose, rushed. At any rate, like I say, I like it better than I should, which is why I'm giving The Rescuers 4 big stars. All right, let's hop over to MST3 A to Z. This is, of course, the segment in the show where we are looking back at every movie featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000 in alphabetical order, because I am a huge nerd. Today we are looking at the beginning of the end, and no, that does not mean that we are getting near the end of these Mystery Science Theater movies. This one starts with a B. We are just at the beginning here. Beginning at the End is an amiable enough 50s monster sci-fi movie. This one stars Peter Graves, so you've got him anchoring the whole thing, and he's pretty good, and that gives it a solid base for what's to come. It's directed by Bert I. Gordon, Mr. Big himself, and the director of many movies with big things in it. This time the big thing is grasshoppers. Grasshoppers attacking Chicago. Like I say, for what this movie is, for this sort of 50s sci-fi, low-budget monster affair, this one's pretty good. Graves helps it a lot, and the movie moves at a pretty reasonable clip, although it does fall back on a lot of the genre cliches like scientists and the army and stuff. Probably, I think the biggest plus and the biggest minus for this movie is the grasshoppers themselves. Instead of making like puppet grasshoppers, Bert tries to do a lot of the effects with rear projection, so he's filming actual grasshoppers against against movie screens with so the grasshoppers look giant next to the regular people. That all sort of falls apart at the end, though. There's a lot of shots of the grasshoppers. They're supposed to look like they're climbing the Sears Tower and other Chicago landmarks. But what they did there is they just took some postcards and then put grasshoppers on top of the postcards. So it looks really phony. There's times when the grasshopper's arms are off of the building entirely, and just that 2D effect of the postcard doesn't work out very well. Still, better than a lot. I'm going to give this one 2 stars. I'm feeling generous today, so I'm going to give you a twofer on the Mystery Science Theater front. And we're going to talk now about The Being from Another Planet. This is a very forgettable late 70s, early 80s budget monster affair with none of the love or care that was in the beginning of the end. If love and care, but Bert cares. The people behind The Being from Another Planet, I'm not saying they didn't care. I get the feeling they did. They just didn't have the resources that even Bert had at his disposal. And as a result, you end up with a very dreary, very draggy, and very forgettable movie. The Being from Another Planet, believe it or not, is a movie about a space mummy. And something I've come to terms with recently is I apparently really like mummies. Who knew? Mummies might be my favorite movie monster, and that surprises me as much as it does you. This mummy's not in the movie a lot. He's pretty lame. There are some, halfway decent sets early on when they're like opening the sarcophagus and stuff. This movie is not helped by it being so murky and hard to see. Now, it's possible that's just the print that Mystery Science Theater was able to get a hold of, but it's hard to imagine this movie looking particularly good, even in full Blu-ray glory. Like I said, super forgettable, super boring, 1 star. I think it's time we went to a brand new segment. These are Hollywood classics. Today we're going to talk about Bachelor Mother. This is a movie that stars the great Ginger Rogers. Now, I have a Ginger Rogers confession, which is that I have never been that big a fan of Ginger Rogers. She is most famous today, I think it's fair to say, for her partnership with Fred Astaire and their singing and their dancing movies together. This is Ginger Rogers on her own, or at least without Mr. Astaire, in a comedy picture. And until this picture aired recently on Turner Classic, also known as maybe the greatest channel on cable, I had no idea that Ginger Rogers did these sort of comedy pictures. And more than that, I had no idea that Ginger Rogers is hilarious. She is so funny in this movie, and in the several others I've watched since it. Honestly, I'm blown away. She has gone from a, sort of an also ran in a Fred Astaire, a great dancer, but, not somebody I was particularly interested in, to, honest to God, one of my favorite film comedians of the classic era. She's so funny in this. This movie revolves around Ginger Rogers works at a department store where she comes in the possession of a random baby. And in trying to give this baby, get it back to its mother, or to the orphanage that the baby was destined to go to, she sort of gets pressured into keeping the baby. And the people at the department store she works at thinks it's her baby. Especially for an earlier Hollywood picture during, the age of censorship and the Hays Code. It's interesting to see this movie about single parenthood. I mean, the movie does do this dance where the movie makes it very clear that even though the other characters think it is, it's not her baby, to stay in line with those very restrictive Hays Code ideas about what you could and couldn't do in a movie. But, I mean, ultimately, it's just a coded version of being able to do a movie about a single mother working at a department store, trying to live her old life, but now having this baby to take care of. Of course, Ginger warms to the baby, and her relationship with the baby is great. Also great is her relationship with David Niven, probably best known for his role in the first Pink Panther movie at this point, and for being that dude who was on stage at the Oscars when the naked guy ran across the stage. At any rate, David Niven is the romantic lead in this. He's the heir to the department store fortune, and he has fallen in love with Ginger and ends up loving her baby and all. You also have the great Charles Coburn in this as the owner of the department store. He is always a terrific character actor presence in these sorts of movies, and he really, oh man, does he want that baby. Oh, does he want to have a grandbaby so bad. This is a movie I had never heard of before, but that I think really deserves to be watched and appreciated and placed, really at a very high point in the annals of classic Hollywood comedies. This is a hugely underrated picture that I am recommending you run out and try to see. 4.5 stars. Okay, folks. I think it's time we went over to the Christmas corner. This is, of course, the part of the show where we are going to talk about Christmas movies. Specifically, well, not only, but often, those Christmas movies featured on the Hallmark Channel. This week, we're going to look at The Mistletoe In. The Mistletoe In is the story of a lady who wants to be a romance novel author. So she goes to a, for some reason, Christmas-timed romance novel writing seminar at a big resort hotel where she meets and falls in love with one of her fellow conference attendees who, spoiler alert, as if it weren't super obvious throughout the movie, is actually the big-name author who's there to give a big talk at the end of the conference. The star of this movie is Alicia Witt. If you're me, and I know I am, you know Alicia Witt from, she was the daughter on Sybil, the Sybil Shepherd starring sitcom that I, for some reason, watched a lot of at an age that I feel like was entirely too young to be into a sitcom starring Sybil Shepherd. Most recently, though, and more amusingly to me, Alicia Witt played the demon in the most recent season of The Exorcist. Now, I don't want this Christmas corner Mistletoe In review to turn into a review of Fox's The Exorcist series. But first off, The Exorcist TV show is really great. It's really a lot of fun. This last season was terrific. John Cho plays the possessed dude. Huge spoiler on that, sorry. And he's terrific in it. And like I say, Alicia Witt then is playing the demon when we see her on screen. So it was amusing to watch The Mistletoe In concurrently with the current season of The Exorcist and pretend that she is a malevolent demon at the heart of a Christmas movie. As these Hallmark Christmas movies go, this one was pretty good. It's still rife with cliches. The plot is so transparent that you figure out how it's going to end moments into it. It's, it is what it's meant to be, a very sort of treacly and conventional feel-good movie. But this one works better than most. Alicia is appealing in it. The production isn't half bad. It is a halfway decent movie. I'm going to give it 2.5 stars. Oh, you hear that? I think it's time we went over to the Columbo Files. This week on the Columbo Files, yep, I'm still watching Columbos, and I'm sticking around with the 70s Columbos, which I think we all know are the best Columbos. And I'm happy to talk to you today about Mind Over Mayhem, which features a great character actor, Jose Ferreira, as the killer. But the big news here, outside of a hefty feature role for Columbo's Basset Hound dog named Dog, is the multiple sci-fi connections in this one. So strap in, nerds. This is the Columbo for you. Not only do you have the guy that was Charlie X on the classic Star Trek as a side character in this one, you have a very substantial role for, I think, arguably the greatest science fiction actor of all time, Robbie the Robot. Yes, Robbie the Robot himself is in this movie playing, believe it or not, a robot. Because apparently this was still at a time when you could just have Robbie the Robot in a movie and people were like, yeah, all right, I buy that. Can you imagine, by the way, Because they did this like Robbie the Robot shows up in Lost. Obviously, he's famous for the great sci-fi classic Forbidden Planet, where he debuted. But he shows up in this movie called The Invisible Boy. He shows up in an episode of the short-lived Thin Man TV series. He is in a couple episodes of Lost in Space. Can you imagine if C-3PO just started showing up in like random sitcoms and movies as other robots, but he still looks just like C-3PO? It's weird stuff, man. Overall, as a Columbo movie goes, this one is good. I really love the ending. It's a little theatrical, but the very final moments are very personal and well acted and nice. Overall, though, it is sort of an average-ish, a high average Columbo episode, despite the presence of Robbie. I'll tell you what could have kicked this one up a couple of notches if Robbie was the killer. Now that's Columbo having to arrest a robot. That's a movie. As stands, pretty good, not great, 3 stars. Studio's starting to feel a little spooky, gang. That means it must be time to call all horror hounds. This week, Horror Hounds, we are looking at Jason X, a movie that I have been meaning to watch since it was released, because this is the I think 10th installment. I think that's where they're getting the X. The 10th installment in the Friday the 13th series that sees the machete-wielding Jason go to outer space to kill some dudes. Oh man, I remember when this was coming out in the commercials or on TV, this immediately looked like a bad movie, but the sort of cheese fest that you sort of wanted to see. And it is that. I saw it recently because it was featured on one of my favorite podcasts, How Did This Get Made? The Bad Movie Podcast, that if you're watching this show and you're not listening to that podcast, I don't know what to do for you. But Jason X, I don't want to quite say I liked it. I sort of liked it. It is fun, cheesy, and stupid as all heck. I'm not a huge fan of the Friday the 13th series. I've tried. I can't get into them. I suspect if you are, then you don't like this movie, because it's definitely treating that series and Jason himself poorly. But if you're just into a dopey sci-fi movie, you're going to like it. Some of the big features from this one for me, outside of just that all of the costuming makes it look like the 90s went to outer space. Lots of midriffs in this movie, gang. Is you've got a actually pretty fun cameo from the great horror director David Cronenberg early in the movie. Why Cronenberg does these cameos, I couldn't tell you. He does not seem like the sort of guy who would be interested in those sorts of things, but he is. The star of the movie is Lexa Doig. You might remember her from the show Andromeda, the Kevin Sorbo show based on a Gene Roddenberry idea that, honest to God, I thought was awful, but that's me. It also stars Lisa Ryder, who was also in Andromeda, so you have 2 stars of Andromeda before that show started teaming up for Jason X. Lisa Ryder is the shining light of this movie. She plays a kind of weirdo robot who, outside of spending the whole movie just wanting to make out with her creator, at the end of the movie undergoes a video game character upgrade to become a real butt kicker. So now she's wearing a ridiculous leather costume and has big guns and is blowing people away and trying to take out Jason up until, I'm going to spoil it, who cares? Until she's beheaded and spends the rest of the movie being run around as just, I'll show you what it's like. I'll show you what it's like. It's like this. This is the rest of the movie for the robot character right here, is running around, and she's like this, and in the wide shots, she's a very fake head. And then they close up to just the actress sticking her head through somebody's arm. So we're going to put that right there as I let you know that this movie, Jason X, is a 2.5-star affair. Well, it's time for nobody's favorite segment. This is Worst of the Week. Now, of course, this is where I talk about the worst movie I watched this week, and this week that was The Dark Tower. Now, this is a movie based on a very lengthy series of Stephen King books. So if you imagine a Stephen King book, that's already a long book. Now imagine that it's a whole series of books set in a specific world, and so you got like 8 or 9 Stephen King books. It's a lot of book. And so the geniuses over at Hollywood, they've been hemming and hawing a Dark Tower movie, which is about a sort of fantasy apocalypse world where a lone gunslinger wanders the plains trying to hunt down the Man in Black. I've never read these, that's all I know about them. But you've got, like I say, you got a stack of books like this. So imagine your average Hollywood executive waking up one morning and saying, let's take all of these books and let's make like a 90-minute movie. This is going to go well. Now, they've been trying to make this Dark Tower thing for a long time, and for a long time, I think Ron Howard and Steven Spielberg were attached to it. And the idea was that they were going to make like a series of Dark Tower movies, and in between the movies, there would be a TV show, which would have been at least an interesting prospect that might have allowed them to cover the whole affair. Probably, I don't think it would have worked, but it would have been maybe interesting. Here, like I say, they tried to condense everything down to a single movie, and the results are indecipherable. Even though I had heard this was terrible, I was sort of looking forward to this movie. It stars Idris Elba, who is an actor who deserves a lot more work. He's a phenomenal and super cool actor that has not, I think, hasn't gotten that breakout movie role yet, despite crazy solid TV work in like Luther and, of course, The Wire, aka the greatest television program of the early 2000s. But this movie is, like I say, it's completely incomprehensible. At no point did I fully understand what was going on. Nothing about the movie works. Elba's character, even though he's cool, doesn't work, nor does Matthew McConaughey playing the evil Men in Black. I don't know who he is or what he wants or what he's doing, which is not a good thing for a movie. And plus, the movie isn't even cool looking. With this great fantasy world as a backdrop, you would think that they would at least be able to make it neat looking. I am, as I have said a number of times on this show, a complete sucker for movies that have amazing production design, even if the story is terrible. Well, this doesn't even have that. This movie has really nothing going for it, except for a pair of actors who are, terrific actors that are fun to watch, even in a bad movie where their performances are hardly at fault here, where the script is giving them nothing to do. But yeah, this is a lousy movie, 1.5 stars. Okay, so of course, the only way to wash the taste of the worst of the week out of our mouth is with the best of the bunch. This week, the best of the bunch was unquestionably The War for the Planet of the Apes. Now, I am a big ape fan. We did, back in the day, back on kind of the older version of the show, we did a whole episode dedicated to the Planet of the Apes series, but at that point, I had not yet seen War for the Planet of the Apes. I was looking forward to it, thought I would like it, but here's the deal. This is the third movie in the latest, grouping of 8 movies. I liked the first one a lot. I liked the second one a fair amount, but not quite as much as the first. I kind of thought the third would probably continue along those lines, even though it's gotten really strong reviews. This is probably the best of the, well, not only is it the best of the bunch for the show, it's the best of the bunch for your new ape movies, and probably the second best ape movie of all time. We're not going to beat that first ape movie, folks. War for the Planet of the Apes is phenomenal. We are even further into the future in the ape revolution here. Humanity is at its lowest point. There is not a lot of humans left, and worse, humanity has become afflicted with a plague that is making them lose intelligence and become mute. This is truly the chance for the apes to take over. Woody Harrelson plays an army general type guy who does not want to go gentle into that good night. He's going to kill him some apes first, man. We, of course, once again follow Caesar, played through motion capture by Andy Serkis, and his band of apes as they head out to try and stop Woody Harrelson. And in all honesty, the apes didn't want to have anything to do with Woody Harrelson. They were happy to let him and the rest of humanity be until Woody showed up on their doorstep, killed him a bunch of apes, including one of Caesar's children, and I think wife. Ugh. Listen, this movie is just great. It is a movie about survival, and like a lot of great science fiction, there's a degree of allegory here. as the problem facing the apes is a real one in terms of Woody Harrelson and his team, but there's also an existential crisis for Caesar at the heart of this, which is who does he want to be? And as we're, since we want to see ourselves in these apes in the movie through the allegory, who do we want to be? Because Caesar has set out on this mission of revenge with just a small party of apes, and now, he's furious. He wants to, because his wife and child were killed, now he wants to kill the last of the humans. Along the way, they encounter a little girl who has been abandoned by her family and who is suffering from that plague. So she can't talk anymore. And the automatic assumption is that, that she doesn't have any cognition anymore, that she's not still, conscious really, that she has become an animal. But throughout the movie, we come to see that no, there's still something going on up there. She is still a being, and a being who deserves our respect and our compassion, which is a thing Caesar doesn't want to see, but it's a thing that, of course, throughout the movie, he comes to understand and see, and he comes to understand and sympathize with the humans, even as the humans continue to do terrible things to the apes. And so the question becomes centrally not only how to survive, but how to survive with our ideals intact, and like I say, be who we want to be. How do we not become the monsters that we're fighting? That's the question at the heart of War of the Planet of the Apes, which is a super heavy and heady question for what had ought to be a movie about a bunch of apes shooting dudes. Like I said, this is just a great movie, a terrific wrap up to this current ape trilogy that does leave room for there to be more ape movies yet. If you haven't seen it, man, you oughta. Great stuff. 4.5 stars. That is going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. We'll be back next time where we keep trying to review every movie ever made. Good night.